Okay, it's been a while, thankfully, but once again, it is time to talk about World of Warcraft's narrative design. This video will contain spoilers for the 10.1 campaign, finale, and the new blue Dragonflight quests, both of which I do highly recommend playing through. One of them is pretty damn good, outright incredible, and the other one is, yeah, fine, good maybe. So what's the point? I'll get to it right now. Now that we've seen the final chapter of 10.1's campaign and the lead-in to 10.2, all I've got to say is this. World of Warcraft's current narrative design, note, narrative design is not writing, narrative design is something different. Its current narrative design is a mess. It's not as messy as Shadowlands, mind you, but it is still a mess. The actual quest content is great, often fantastic, as we have been trumpeting to everybody here. But there are so many things that are completely left out that the macro narrative, that is to say the story as a whole, feels like they are making it up as they're going along. They're not, but it feels that way. They have overcorrected from issues that cropped up in BFA in one way, but still have not solved their number one problem, remembering that the player experience is the most important thing of all. And of course, today's sponsor. Alright, polish up your Cupid Gamer brain. I know mine needed it. If you want to learn maths, computer science, essentially become a modern day wizard, then think interactively, break big problems down to small ones, and do so with brilliant.org/Bellular Warcraft, where the first 200 to click my link get 20% off an annual plan, and they've got a 30-day free trial so you can get stuck in right now. So, do you like the number crunching that goes into games, the actual thinking? Well, you can get started learning the fundamentals of computer science, a 3-part course that takes you through the pillars of the field, and once you've done that, hit up neural nets and algorithms, which will give you an understanding of how things actually work. Like how, back say in Battle for Azeroth, when WoW kind of exploded on a server level. Yeah, remember that crazy lag? Use a spell and just boom! World content went mad. Well, it's all this topic. So that's fun, and they do so much more, like partnering with amazing creators like Sabina Hossenfelder, Real Engineering, and Kurtzgesagt. Brilliant just take the stuff that wasn't fun at school, unless you had a total legend of a teacher, and they actually make it exciting. And approaching this as an adult, I get a sense of accomplishment. You just can't beat self-directed interactive learning, especially with how well developed their content is. So get started now. The first 200 to click my link down below will get 20% off an annual plan. And regardless, click that link because you'll get the 30-day free trial. You can peruse around all their content, and actually, you'll have a damn good time. So check out Brilliant. Thanks to them for sponsoring this channel. With that said, let's go. Alright, I'll start explaining. The first major issue is all the burning questions that enter your head, but nobody brings up in-game. Nobody bothers, as if the characters around you, including your own, are dumb as rocks. Chekhov's guns, all left unfired. Have you ever heard of Chekhov's gun? It's the idea, in Act 1, if there's a rifle placed on the mantelpiece, in Act 3, that must be fired. It's the idea of, well, if you're going to be setting things up, you should really be paying them off. Like, as an example, what's up with Farak? Remember when, in the middle of the 10.1 campaign, what we were doing was all about how badly Sibelian wanted to kill Farak, and how his hubris got Loam attacked. Loads of Nifin died. Everyone swore they'd get revenge. And nobody brought it up ever again within this patch. Remember, this patch was announced by Farak going to Zaralek. A huge chunk of the narrative impetus, the part that was emotionally compelling for our characters and us, and the campaign wraps up with Alexstrasza talking of victory while Farak is still burning half the Dragon Isles down regularly. Shadowflame, what he's powered by, that was part of Neltharion's legacy. It's just roaming wild. Alexstrasza says the threat of Aberrus is over, and then basically says, hey, look what's happening next. Then it cuts to a cutscene so fast that it may as well have a whiplash warning trying to set up the Emerald Dream. I mean, sure, they obviously have a plan to deal with Farak later, because there's all this stuff hinting that Farak seems to be making himself a set of Deathwing armor, but if you listened to the way Alexstrasza talks, her delivery, you wouldn't imagine that he is like literally as the cinematic is playing, burning down another zone on her isles. If this was Shadowlands, you would immediately think that they've dropped the plot point entirely. And quite frankly, that sucks for players who want a cohesive story. And then, even worse, we get to the stuff in Aberys. The campaign finale has you accompany our main cast into Aberys, cleaning up what is left with the Black Talon. Sibelian and Rathian have some character moments in there, apologizing to each other for being sort of dicks in the past, and talking about what Neltharion was really like, how his experimentation and cruelty is not what their flight was supposed to be all about. It's fantastic stuff, until we get to the end. If you look around after beating Neltharion, you'll notice these murals. One is a reference to the stone lion, an ancient Buddhist statue depicting the material world being protected. The other is a reference, of course, to Atlas, the Greek titan whose punishment was to hold the sky upon his shoulders, but more recently has been depicted holding the world itself. These are perfect depictions of the two sides of Neltharion we've seen in the lore. Then, you go through the Void Portal and you see one more mural, him as Deathwing controlling the world. These tell us the story of his corruption. Whatever was down there is what convinced him that he was entitled to the world. In charge of the aspects, a short story that Blizzard published during Cataclysm. This was all set up, including how existing as Earthwarder is to feel all of Azeroth's soul-crushing pain, and how Neltharion felt the Titans abandoned Azeroth, implying that old gods really told him the truth of things. Now, that obviously seems to be the central plot beat, the central story beat of Dragonflight, that there is more to this Titan set up with order and everything than we're really being told. That's what all the Incarnates have been saying as they fought against us. It's literally what we find when we break into Tyr's lab, along with the Dragonscale expedition. However, none of Neltharion's actual character motive, none of this wider narrative, which is all there in-game, is so much as considered by any of his children in their dialogue. Hell, remember the Legacy cinematic, where Nosdormu sets up that the moment and the motive of Neltharion's fall was extremely important? That isn't even touched on in the actual content in the game. It looks like everyone forgot. And then, even when Abyssian becomes the Earthwarder, they don't bother mentioning anything about what that title actually means. The weight of the world on your back. They're just like, no, we like Abyssian. And they just don't touch anything else that's been set up. Also, the nature of the corruption itself seems like it's going to be important, but we get down there and it's back to being treated like a nameless constant force. So we're asking, what was down there? Because what was down there in the Sarkareth boss room, that's what spoke to us in the Black Locust side quest when Dragonflight came out, proving that it has an actual identity. And it looks, if you actually look around the boss room, like it may have been chained up there at some point. It has connections to this whole new space-styled cosmic void that we've never seen before. But nobody comments on any of this. There's not even a throwaway line. It seems as if this may be the actual source of the Black Flight's constant corruption. The thing that sent Deathwing over the edge, that Nosdormu says is important in the lead-up material to this expansion. And they just don't care about mentioning it whatsoever. I mean, did you realize that the Echo of Neltharion was not actually an Echo of Neltharion, but was actually a faceless one? Did you notice that? Look at its corpse. Did any of the other characters in the game notice that? Is this not really relevant to our story and the characters that we're dealing with? Because some of the more extreme emotional reactions displayed by Sibelian and Abyssian were kind of caused by it whispering to them at the start of the patch. How did we forget this? The fact that none of the characters said anything about that happening is such a missed opportunity. And it's more than that, it logically, it's like the bits that tie the plot together are just not there. I mean, think of it this way. When you were going into Aberys, did you think that the major threat was Shadowflame? Because that's the way it was framed. And then we get there, and we see this cosmic void stuff out of nowhere. So you would think that that would be fairly major. You would imagine that they at least would vaguely talk about it, but no, it is literally not incorporated into the story at all. And it is genuinely cool stuff. It looks beautiful. It's got us all fascinated. We read the flavor text of, of the trinkets, the Anshul and all of that. It looks beautiful. It's amazing. Sarkareth is a stunning fight. The idea of Cosmic Void, that being the real secret of Aberys, that was awesome. Except only as an idea, because nobody talking about it in the game makes the whole scenario feel incoherent. And like it takes place in a generic space, not the actual environment that Blizzard's artists designed. So to get to the takeaway, the narrative design bites off way more than it can chew. Of all of the elements that it's set up, it only bothers, I'm not even talking about wrapping plot points up, because obviously while it is good to have things for later, you do have to resolve what you put out there. The narrative design is just biting off way more than it can chew. It's setting up way more than it's able to not even pay off, but have characters comment on in a way that is believable based on their motivations and their situation, and in many cases, the pre-established intelligence of those characters. It just does not manage to work its way through what it promises. The story actually being told is a good one on paper, it is, but it's just not being told in a way that is satisfying. There's also the fact that the dialogue in the cutscenes is genuinely just characters repeating their arcs at each other in big long sentences. Essentially recapping things we've just, 90 seconds ago heard them say, but at each other. And speaking in a way that is just not how anyone talks. No one talks like that. The dialogue in these cinematics is so woeful. The actual content of what they're saying, great emotional character work. The voice acting, cutscene direction, often fantastic, but they are spouting generic, lifeless lines at each other. It is a betrayal of the conversations that they have during the quests, and of the optional dialogue, which is always miles better. Alexstrasza's dialogue in the final cinematic is some of the most trite I have heard. It's all just unrealistic fluff, and it needs a good look at for the next patch. This is the sort of thing where anyone outside of Warcraft looks at it and thinks, oh my god, what is... There are kids shows better than that dialogue. What? Like, that's what people look at. They look at what we're doing, they're like, oh really, you like that? And this is without even getting into how the lead-in to patch 10.2 seems jammed in completely out of nowhere. I mean, I'm fairly sure I know how they're going to, quite well, weave it through the next two patches, but the way that they basically just drop a 20-30 second teaser trailer at the end that is completely incoherent with what's actually going on in the Isles with Farak, because while we're talking about this big tree of hope, Farak is literally burning the Onaran plains. This plot has so little consistent direction and some of the most grim pacing that I've seen, despite all the content actually coming out. Actually asking how we get some content that's incredible and then some that feels so disjointed like this raises so many questions that I don't even know where to start. But there's another part to this. Less serious, less obvious, maybe a bit more insidious, but if you like Rathian, this might be something you felt. The second thing they need to learn how to do is, to put it uncharitably, pander, to put it a bit more kindly, actually pay attention to the experience of their audience. I didn't say to stop pandering, I said to start maybe pandering a bit. As in, to write a narrative that people actually want to experience. So, how do you feel about Abyssian being the aspect? There are basically two answers. If you agree, it means you follow the story and agree with the logic that they presented. Personally, by the way, I do think Abyssian is the correct pick for the aspect. Abyssian is the one who didn't want the legacy, he is the one most stable and most wise about it, therefore he gets it. Sibelian and Rathian have both realized that they're a bit too close to things, they've learned from Sarkareth's mistake, and they want to serve their flight in other ways. It is all quite, Bran Stark, of course, but it is also, it's pretty common sentiment. It makes sense. They went out of their way, Blizzard that is, to make sure that you saw that, with Sibelian and Rathian consistently at each other's throats, being very unreasonable, in some parts helped by the high stakes, in others by the whispers from Aberys, whereas, even under those whispers, Abyssian kept a cool head and acted as a good mentor to Emberthal. It completely makes sense. He is the one who cultivated wisdom in High Mountain for thousands of years, removed from family drama, whereas Sibelian was constantly at war, too close to his father, and Rathian was drinking and murdering his corrupted brothers, trying not to be his father, constantly haunted by the possibility of becoming him, though. That is what you're supposed to think. It's literally true. But if you perhaps wanted to see Rathian get what he wanted, if you disagree and you think that Rathian should have been the aspect anyway, especially because Rathian's previous character arcs, about not being his father, that's been completed like 3 times now, and at the end of this campaign he shows the maturity to not want it, in a way you also have a point. The issue here is that they didn't really stop and think about what would be cool, what would be a cool and engaging story beat for the player of the game. The player who has watched Rathian grow for years. They kind of went for the correct moral lesson, the boring plain version, the version where nobody gets offended, but nobody really has ambition. What people, I think, really want is a compelling, dramatic tale, probably one that sees Rathian overcoming his own arrogance and earning that spot somehow. It could have panned out very differently and still made sense, because they can write it whatever way they want. And the way that they wrote it, I would posit, is, while emotionally intelligent, perhaps the most unexciting way they could. Now, there's a concept in literary criticism called paratext, which is basically everything surrounding the work itself. Context, outside the game, including what people's expectations are. This is something that the narrative design of WoW has basically dropped the ball on for the last while, and this is a really good example. I would say that the way they constantly treated the jailer, is a really good example of disregarding paratext, but this is but another one. There are years of Rathian being the Black Dragon, sorting shit out, helping kill N'Zoth. The times where Abyssian basically wasn't a dragon because he hid away in High Mountain as Ebonhorn. Hell, it's Rathian who actually freed him from corruption in BFA. The narrative designers can do whatever they want, of course, it's their game, but I think a degree of, remembering what people expect and what they want from the IP, especially when they've played with these characters for years, I think that should be taken. And I'm not saying just do popular thing all time. I'm maybe saying to keep in mind those player expectations to make sure that you're making a game that players will actually enjoy. This has literally been what has saved the game in the past. Listening closely to feedback, hearing what people want, decoding that to find out what they really want, and then making that a reality. Maybe it just means we need the narrative equivalent of dropping borrowed power for a bit, the narrative equivalent of, the new upgrade system, the affix nerf, the incredible raid design. It all boils down to the same process and the same result, making something that people want to play. That's the hardest lesson to learn when you're a creative in an industry working on a product. It being good is only half the battle. People actually have to want it. And I think for quite a long time, World of Warcraft has tried to be all, very calm, very wholesome, very emotionally mature, all those plus, thumbs up, good boy things. But in a lot of cases, it's kind of forgotten to be cool. And when I see a lot of feedback to the story these days, even though a lot of us would say it's objectively good, for a lot of people it's just like, that's uninteresting, it's not cool. And then of course you think back to the signature Blizzard epic moments that as much as the amount of cheese may have you eye roll, they are ultimately what built this franchise and scaled it. Okay, now this is where things get fun. There's a reason that I'm calling this a narrative design problem and not a storytelling or writing problem. These complaints only really apply to the main story stuff so far. In the human and orc heritage quests, and in the blue Dragonflight quests, in the Bane and Centaur quests, very few to zero of the issues talked about today arise, because you can tell that they go to extreme lengths to make sure there are no questions left unanswered. They are almost to a beat, like exactly what players actually want. It's maybe not a 100% hit rate, but it is damn close. They've been knocking it out of the park, and the blue quest in particular was astoundingly high quality. Every blue dragon you might want to see is there, their legacy is respected. It takes themes forward from Kelagos' experience with the Tuskar at the start of the expansion right into the end, while also bringing back characters from Legion, characters from before Legion, adding in tons of excellent world building to old zones, carrying forward quest lines from Vanilla and Wrath, all while having fun new gameplay and a scenario fight that feels basically perfect for the characters you're there with. It is extremely good, a gold standard for WoW content going forward. But it also has an easier job. The truth of the matter is that finishing the 10.1 campaign and then doing these quests in the same day, it's like playing two completely different games in the same overall experience. You can tell the love for the world and the players in the Blue Dragonflight one, but with the other one, it just doesn't feel like it was afforded the time. It feels like a first draft. So then it's time to talk about why, or at least why it's like this from what we can tell. Because you can really notice a pattern here. Main story, not great. Side story, very great. That's been Dragonflight in a nutshell so far. And that's why I'm calling this a narrative design issue. Because honestly, you see, if we're just talking about writing, forest for the trees. Narrative design is the big picture that a game like this actually has to succeed at. I know this is now getting to the more like, nerdy game dev side of things. But narrative design is not always about solving problems with words, right? There's something about how tightly controlled the main narrative is, how connected it must be to future patches. There's something about how this main content is made, and maybe the cinematic planning, that seems to stifle the hell out of it, because it is the same people, the same teams who are making this game, and the only thing we can really tell as a difference is main versus side. I mean, is it the case that this main campaign scenario stuff is like locked in before they know what Abyss is going to look like? I mean, can we have an explanation for why none of the characters ask the most obvious questions, especially when those questions are directly relating to what they've experienced in the narrative you're currently playing? Like the whole Echo of Neltharion's actually a faceless one. You would think that the two, sons of Neltharion who have been lured in and messed around by this whispering dude, and by the way, they're also literally there when you kill him, you think they might ask a question. Why don't they? Why is Cosmic Void not even delved into, even though it's an abundantly new thing that we've all just seen from the first time, and is also one of the most potent sources of corruption for the Black Dragonflight, which again is one of the most important things that Rathian and Sibelian have been dealing with. Like, how does it make sense that that is just not talked about? Obviously, there is something in their production process that is making this content feel fall well short. Because if they could have their A-plot be as strong as like the Blue Dragon quest line, oh my god, we would be talking FF14 MSQ. So clearly, with the side quest, you see the bit of content that is more siloed off, that has a bit more freedom, turns out so much better, and it has pretty much every time so far. And this is to the point where I'm actually terrified of 10.2, because it'll be hitting up the Green Dragonflight and the Night Elves. They deserve what the Blue Flight got. I mean, the Night Elves really deserve a break after the years of messy storytelling that they've had. But if they're a main focus and they get what the Black Dragons got, because the Black Dragons themselves didn't get much. 3 characters did in a small drama, but not really something that's going to be like, the backdrop of this MMO, because we're obviously telling a story in an MMO. Therefore, the grander scale of things should absolutely play a major role into the A-plot. If that's the quality of narrative design that we get, I think that'll be a massive downgrade in terms of unanswered questions and a story that just feels cut to pieces. Because if you're a player who likes Night Elves, it's constantly felt like everything in your story that's not to do with Tyrande has just been sliced out. And the actual story of the Night Elves as people isn't properly dealt with. So Blizzard, There you go. Look, I think you know the difference between what good and bad is. Get it sorted. Come on. You guys have got such a good opportunity here. It's so clear you can make amazing stories and amazing quest content, as we see in the Blue Flight one. But if you want people to actually care about your lore again, if you want people to be engaged in that story, to be really excited for the next patch, like whenever we do Aberrus and we're teased about these whispers and all this drama happens, you know, people want to have They want to see characters engage in that, right? They actually want to engage with the material that's there. But if your main quest line can have these characters not even pass comment on loads of these things and not miss, and miss the most obvious details, then how are you going to have players who actually treat your lore with love and really care and really hang in the details and, you know, really get excited for the new stuff? It's just a massive amount of macro narrative incoherence. And it's even like the stuff with Farak. Alexstrasza shouldn't be talking the way she is at the 10.1 campaign end. She shouldn't be. I don't know if you wrote that in a time where you thought that by the time that was being dealt with, Farak would already be dead. I don't know if that's the case. But the way Alexstrasza is talking makes no sense given the broader A-plot and how one of the incarnates, I mean Farak, now that he is powered up with all of this Shadow Flame, he's probably more powerful than Razageth. And look how much of a worry Razageth was when she was flapping about, well, doing her thing and all the primal storms were happening. Now we have Farak, who is more powerful, with more, you know, this primal energy powering him up. And Alexstrasza is just completely oblivious to it. Again, it's as if these things, Blizzard, are being written in complete isolation, and it just torpedoes the narrative cohesion of the core story of your game. So you gotta do better. You've gotta do better. And if shipping patches this fast means that you cannot tie your game world together in a cohesive fashion, maybe you need to reevaluate how you're actually planning this content, because you're not actually getting the most use out of it. When you look at Aberrus, you look at all the work and love that's went in there, like, you've not got what you should have out of that. It launched a bit funky, as we've talked about before, and all the great lore details and hints and things to get excited about, your own story barely even comments on them. You know, characters generically talk about Deathwing being a bad dude, but actually engaging with the details, the material, the specifics, it's not there. So that's basically it. Macro narrative design. It's really important. And I don't know how they've managed to plan it this bad. I do know that an outgoing person on the Quest team did talk about how a lot of schedule things ended up being reshuffled and how it was quite chaos, you know, to work at Blizzard when they worked there. And this is on recent content. This was somebody specifically talking about the Forbidden Reach. And I suppose that the Forbidden Reach had to come into existence pretty damn quick. And it was the prequel for patch 10.1. Then I suppose one must wonder, were parts of 10.1 originally thought up of in a different context? Who knows? Those are my thoughts. I'd love to know what you think about the macro narrative design of World of Warcraft. And, you know, how do you think we could get back to patches being real cool, you know? Being narratives and settings that people are genuinely thrilled to have, as, say, with a lot of Legion. All right, that's me. See you next time.